I thought someone had thrown a firework and Yvonne fell. I ran over to her, and then a few seconds later I heard the screams because other people had been shot. There were 2 gunmen. There were 12 or 13 Libyans shot and wounded, and we arrived at the hospital. I was shaking like a leaf. The doctor came in. He said, "PC Murray, we're taking her to theatre now." But roughly an hour and a half later, again I'm still there on my own. The same doctor came back. He had the green gown on, and there was some blood on it, and he was crying. And he said, "So sorry, we lost her." The internal injuries were far worse than we thought. The bullet went through her elbow, through her arm, into her torso, through her spleen, through her internal organs. And he said there was just nothing we could do. "I'm so sorry." And off he went.
Good evening and welcome to Crime Timing. Tom Wood, how are you?
Very well, Simon. Very well indeed.
You sound a bit croaky there. Have you got the cold?
I was just clearing my throat. I was stunned into silence by your eloquence, and I was just clearing my throat. I'm looking very much forward to tonight. I'll tell you, very much forward to tonight.
Yeah, me too, because we spoke to Matt Johnson last week, and he gave us the story from his perspective, which was really interesting, about the murder of Yvonne Fletcher in 1984. But tonight, we've got a man who was a colleague of Yvonne's, who was with her that day, who was the last person probably to speak to her and speak with her. And he's been campaigning since then for almost 40 years for justice for Yvonne for that murder. Welcome to Crime Time Inc. John Murray, how are you?
Good evening. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me on board.
Not at all, John. It's a real pleasure. And we got the story from Matt, but I said that you were with Yvonne. Can you take us back to that day, John? Maybe first tell us a wee bit about yourself. Where were you stationed at that time? Were you a colleague of Yvonne's at Bow Street office? What was going on at that time in your career and in your police life?
Yeah, I joined the Met as a young cadet in 1972, came down from Aberdeen. And after my training at Hendon, I was posted to Bow Street Police Station, which is in Westminster, Covent Garden. And it was there that I met Yvonne. Yvonne came there after me, and she was on a different shift to me. But obviously we spoke, or everybody spoke, when we changed shifts and all sorts of things like that. And then a couple of years later, we were picked to do various things together. We were one of the first community officers in the area, so we worked quite well. And we also looked after the new recruits when they came out from training school. We used to take them out, show them what to do, how things should be done, show them around the ground. We were quite busy and we worked well together.
Good, John. John, you said you're from Aberdeen originally. Did you serve in the Scottish Police at all, or did you head down to the Met to join up there?
No, it was back then, I think it was the North Eastern Constabulary. And as a 15-year-old, I applied to join the cadets up there. And I also applied at the same time to join the cadets in London. And the Met were the first ones to apply. Invited me down to London for 2 days for an assessment and a test and interview. So I came down here. Obviously, on the first night, I met some few other people from all over the country who'd been invited here as well. And I was astounded and amazed by the bright lights. Piccadilly Circus, Leicester Square. And I thought, yes, this is for me. I'd never seen this before. This looks pretty good. My mum and dad, I think, gave me 6 months. Almost 60 years later, I'm still here.
You think you'll enjoy it? Do you think you'll stick it?
I think so. I think so.
Tom, it's good that he's losing that Aberdeen accent eventually, though, isn't it? It's slipping a wee bit.
I was just thinking that the Northeastern Counties Force was called Scottish Northeastern Counties, SNEC. We always called it SNEC. And I'll tell you what, there's no bigger contrast between SNEC and Bow Street in London. I can't think of a bigger contrast. It's certainly not many bright lights in SNEC, I can assure you.
John, I remember when I was in the squad, we got a call one night to go to Central Station in Glasgow to intercept the Aberdeen train as it landed in Glasgow because there was a suspect aboard. And the word from the Aberdeen constabulary was that he was in possession of some slap. And this is how it was passed to us, that he was carrying a lot of slap down to Glasgow to sell it. And we had no idea what they were talking about. But we got the guy anyway. We had a photographs faxed through, I think, and we got the guy. And it turned out they'd meant to say smack. Oh dear. So, John, I think you did well to get down to the Met, away from the Northeast.
That was probably a good move then, yeah.
John, when we spoke to Matt, he spoke really nicely about Yvonne and the type of person she was. Two things stuck out: that she was desperate to be a police officer. That was what she wanted to be. But she was only 5'2" or something, and one of the smallest police officers to join the Met. Tell us a wee bit about Yvonne, because that's what this is all about, isn't it?
Yvonne and I had a lot in common because she came up from Wiltshire. She did try to join the Wiltshire police, but they turned her down because of her height. She applied to join the Met. And now, back then, as you probably know, they met to anybody, didn't they? But they did make an exception for her because she was under the height restriction. And she got in, and we used to talk about it. It's something she always wanted to do. She always wanted to help people and look after things. And she was very good. She was a lovely person. And I enjoyed working with her. She was good at what she did. The way she dealt with situations was good. She was a mighty little warrior, if I can put it like that, with a handbag. If we were ever in trouble, the handbag would come out and she would give someone a smack in the head with it, which worked wonders sometimes.
Yeah.
She had a big reputation at Bow Street. Many times when we were dealing with the community or the residents, a lot of them would come into the police station and they'd ask for Yvonne by name. They wouldn't ask for anybody else, and they would wait until she came on duty, maybe a couple of days off or whatever, and they would wait and deal with her. So that's the type of person she was, and that's how high the esteem she had with everybody.
John, you've been working on this for 40 years for justice for Yvonne. How is her family involved in that? Have you had contact with her family over the years to make sure that they're on side with what you've been doing and helping with the inquiries that you've been making over that period of time?
Yes, unfortunately, Mum Queenie and Dad Tim, they both passed away. I think that was one of my biggest regrets because many years ago, I said to Queenie that one day, Queenie, I don't know when it's going to be, but one day, I am going to come back and tell you we've done it. We've actually done it. But she passed away before I could do that. Yvonne is survived by two sisters who are still in Wiltshire. And I do have contact with them. And they fully support what we do.
Lovely. That's nice, John. And getting closer and closer all the time. Let's go back 40 years first and foremost before we find out what you've been doing in the interim. And if you don't mind, take us back to outside the Libyan Embassy on the 17th of April, 1984, in St James Square. What were your duties that day, John? What was going on that day?
We shouldn't have actually been there that day. Yvonne and I were working 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, and we were supposed to be doing community work. And it was an unwritten rule at Bow Street that if you were doing community work, you weren't to be used for anything else because that was the most important thing at that particular time. However, we walked into the station and we were grabbed by the duty sergeant. Now, you don't upset the duty sergeant, do you? Because the duty sergeant's got a bit of power.
God.
So he asked us nicely, which was unusual, if we could cover for two people I think they'd either gone sick or they were required at court that morning, but they should have been at the demonstration. But he said, look, those two can't go. Can you two fill in for them? It's only going to be a couple of hours. You'll be straight back to do what you normally do. And we said, of course, yes, not a problem at all. So we went to join the rest of the guys. I think off the top of my head, there was 10 of us and a sergeant, and off we went. Now, we were told it was going to be a demonstration at the Libyan Embassy, and we were told we're going to be on traffic points. However, on the way to St James's Square from Bow Street, which is a matter of about a mile and a half maximum, we were delayed by traffic. So we got there slightly late. The local guys from the local police station, which is Vine Street, they were put on the traffic points because the roads had to be closed. And we were put outside the front of the embassy, or the People's Bureau, as it was known.
Yeah, all these sliding doors, isn't it? It's all these.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
One, we shouldn't have been there, and two, we shouldn't have been in that particular place, that spot.
Tom, I can see your brain working there. You want to ask John something just now?
I was just thinking that it's such a familiar story, isn't it? The fates aligning. You shouldn't have been there. You shouldn't have been in the right place. You were in the wrong place. It's such a familiar narrative, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So you're both on duty. Are you together? Are you close to each other? Because I remember seeing the cops maybe spaced out like you would at a football or any kind of crowd control
That's
situation.
Right,
yeah.
I was standing next to Yvonne about 3 or 4 feet from her. She was on my right to begin with. Now, what we did that particular morning, and we used to do it quite a lot. We used to get a lot of demonstrations in London. They were 10 a penny. So what we used to do is I would speak to the demonstrators, whoever they were, in front of me, and Yvonne would speak to the people in front of her. Then we would swap places, speak to the same people, and then we'd get together and say, okay, that way you can pinpoint people's behaviour, their attitude, their body language, and you think, okay, if we've got the same opinion, we'll keep an eye on him or we'll keep an eye on her or whatever. So we changed places 3-4 times that morning.
It's another sliding door, isn't it?
That's it.
So what time are we talking in the morning, John?
Well, we got there around about 9 o'clock in the morning. The demonstration was due to start at 10. Round about 9:15, the demonstrators started to arrive. Now, they arrived, a lot of them came from Manchester, Liverpool, way up north. They arrived by coach. The coach is parked at the other side of St James's Square, and these people walked through. Obviously, in front of us, myself and Yvonne, there were crowd barriers. They walked behind the crowd barriers. They were vocal. They were shouting. Most of them had their face covered, either by hoods or masks or scarves. They didn't want to be identified. Most of them were green.
For the benefit of our listeners, because I have some younger followers, Tom, obviously, they will, if they're still with us, they'll remember this very well. But for the sake of my fans out there that are much younger, maybe you could give us a wee bit of the political background then. What was the demonstration about? What was the political, how many were there? Was it boisterous? Were they banners and chanting, etc.?
Yeah, there was banners and there was chanting, there was shouting. What had happened was that Colonel Gaddafi in Libya, a few weeks prior to that, had ordered a public execution in Green Square. And he publicly hung a student who was against him. He'd written something or he'd said something at a rally. He'd been arrested and he was hung. And now this demonstration was in support of that person who had been hung. And this is why those people who arrived were covered up, were disguised, because they didn't want to be identified, because if they had been identified, the people they knew in Libya would probably suffer the same fate.
Okay, I understand. So, take us through the morning then, the shooting, etc. How did that, was there a build-up to that? Was there some tension? Was there something that kicked it off? Or was it a random act, John?
I think it was a bit of all that, to be perfectly honest. We're there, now we're facing the demonstrators, so we've got our back to the People's Bureau. Now, I didn't realise that a few minutes before the actual shooting, the doors opened and some pro-Gaddafi people came out of the Bureau and stood at the other side of the square. We didn't see them, our backs were towards them. But apparently they came out and stood on the other side of the square. Now, that raised tensions a little bit because the people we're looking at had seen these people come out, obviously realised they were pro-Gaddafi. The shouting got a bit more boisterous and a bit more louder. But again, as far as we were concerned, nothing to worry about at all. They're behind crowd barriers. They can't get to each other because we're there. So there shouldn't be a great problem. And it was round about, I think it was about 10:15. I just changed places with Yvonne again. And I thought someone had thrown a firework, if I can put it like that. It's like a firecracker, like a Chinese firecracker or bangers at New Year or whatever. And Yvonne fell. I ran over to her. And the thing I remember, the first thing that struck me was the silence. I'm in the middle of St James's Square in central London, and I couldn't hear anything. It just went quiet. And then a few seconds later, I heard the screams because other people had been shot. And suddenly we were on our own, 4 or 5 of us with Yvonne lying in the road.
I take it the crowd dispersed at this point because of the gunfire? Yes.
They did, yeah. Some of them couldn't move, so some other officers actually dragged them out because they'd been shot as well.
Do we know how many rounds were fired?
I'm not sure. I found this out afterwards. There were 2 gunmen.
Mm-hmm.
There were 12 or 13 Libyans shot and wounded. Quite a few rounds, I would have thought.
Okay. John, I've seen the footage like everyone can. It's there for everyone to see on YouTube. There's lots and lots of coverage of this case. And you're very prominent in most of it. But there's one particular still that affected me when you were over Yvonne on the ground and you've turned round maybe to ask for help or maybe to make sure an ambulance is on the way. And the look on your face tells me that you knew how serious it was right away. Firstly, if you don't want to talk about this, that's fine, John. We can move on from this because I know how upsetting this must be to go back into that.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay. So did you know right away that she was in trouble?
I knew right away she was in trouble. We saw the blood on the road, so obviously we realised what had happened. But we had to get her out of there quickly. But then again, were they going to fire again?
Yeah.
That was racing through everybody's mind as well. But we decided to get him to move her. And we carried her around into the side street, Charles II Street, where someone had called an ambulance. She was lying in the road, and I was with her. A couple of other guys were with her. And we actually lost her. But we brought her back. And then the ambulance arrived. And I went in the ambulance with her. Now, you got to remember, 40-odd years ago, it was the old ambulances, with 2 guys in it and 2 stretchers, basically. So Yvonne was put in. She went to the left-hand side. There were 3 or 4 other Libyans who'd been seriously wounded who were put in the same ambulance. They were sitting on the floor. And off we went. And she was alive. She was talking to me. By talking, I really mean mumbling that because I couldn't really understand what she was saying. And she was obviously in pain. She said, John, my tummy hurts. And I could see her tummy was swollen. So I got a pair of scissors and I just cut her skirt. And that seemed to relieve the pressure slightly. And she seemed to be a bit more happier, although obviously she was still in pain. And it was there I said to her, I said, sweetheart, I don't know what's happened. I've got no idea. I said, but I will find out. And I will get whoever's done this to you. I will get them. And it's only a short journey to Westminster Hospital because that's where we went. But it seemed a lifetime. It seemed a long time, but it wasn't. And we arrived at the hospital. She was taken in with the other guys. And I was put in a side room and just left alone. About half an hour later, I still hadn't seen anybody. I was shaking like a leaf. And a doctor came in and he said, P.C. Murray, he said, you're Yvonne's colleague? I said, yes. And she's been shot, but she should be okay. We're taking her to theatre now. I'll come back and let you know how we get on. And I just sat there and I was trembling. I remember I was shaking. And off he went.
When did you find out? Was it in theatre that she passed away, John, or was she in hospital for a while after that?
No, it was about an hour later, roughly an hour and a half later. Again, I'm still there on my own. The same doctor came back. He had the green gown on, the green hat on, and there was some blood on it. And he was crying. I always remember this doctor was crying. And he said, so sorry. He said, we've lost her. The internal injuries were far worse than we thought. The bullet went through her elbow, through her arm, into her torso, through her spleen, through her internal organs. And he said there was just nothing we could do. I'm so sorry. And off he went.
The damage was just too devastating.
It was, yeah, too much.
We've had a podcast here when we talked about PTSD. We've talked quite a bit. Quite often, cops bring up trauma and incidents in their careers and in their lives that maybe come back to haunt them again in the future or at the time. Did you get help at that time from the Met? What happened thereafter? The cops rallied round?
Oh, well, I suppose I was lucky because I got one day off. I had one day off and I was straight back to work. But PTSD didn't exist then, did it?
No.
You just had to get on with things. There was no such thing. It was part of the job. It was part of what you're paid to do. And that's what most of us, that's what we accepted.
Yeah.
We just got on with it.
I'm sure you've got a view on that, Tom.
Very much. Listening to that is a very moving account, and clearly that incident, that few seconds, that few hours has marked you for the rest of your life. It's come to define you in many respects, not personally, but certainly professionally. She was struck by one bullet, I assume.
That's right.
Yeah. And what was the immediate... You were in the hospital, you were sitting there, you were out of the picture. What was happening back at the locus at that time? What was the first response of the Met when the shooting happened?
I think it was one of disbelief, because this had never happened before at all, anywhere in the UK. And I really don't think they were really that prepared for something like this to happen. But in saying that, obviously, the St James's Square was shut off. Armed officers were sent to the scene. They obviously realised that the people were still inside the People's Bureau. I mean, the other thing we've got to remember, that none of those people inside that building were diplomats. None of them had diplomatic immunity. None of them. They were not diplomats. They were students. They were part of the Revolutionary Committee, which was one of the reasons that obviously was given at the time that we had to release them, because they were entitled to diplomatic immunity. None of them were. There was nothing legally, I think, at that time to prevent anybody, be it the SES or the police or whatever, going in to arrest those people. Now, I do accept, obviously, we had people in expats in Libya, and I know what was happening over in Libya. I can see both sides of the arguments, but we were disappointed. In fact, we were furious that those people walked away.
When was that decision made, John? When did the embassy get emptied? I think there was about 40 of them in there, wasn't there?
There was about, it was about 45, but I think the siege went on for about 2 weeks.
Right.
But as I found out sometime later, the decision that was made that they would be allowed to leave the embassy was basically made within the first 24 hours.
But not by the Met?
But not by the Met.
No.
John, I thought I knew quite a bit about this case, but I didn't realise that none of the people in the embassy had diplomatic coverage. I thought the reason why they were allowed to walk was because they did have diplomatic coverage. That's even more astonishing.
About 3 or 4 months before this incident, Colonel Gaddafi, in every embassy in the world, replaced the diplomats with Revolutionary Committee members, i.e. students. The diplomatic status of those people, they were not diplomats, they were students, and they replaced the diplomats. So none of them were entitled to diplomatic immunity at all.
Right, right. So do you know, the Met had an extensive experience, the Iranian thing, Spaghetti House and all of these things. They had an extensive experience about containing and negotiating and all of that stuff. You had some first-class people there. Why was this treated so differently?
That's a question I think that I've asked many times over the years, and I always get the same answer, and that is it's political. They were dealing with Colonel Gaddafi. We had, I think, was it 5,000 expats in Libya? We had to look after them. But I really don't know the answer to that. It's amazing. It really is. I've found out a lot of things since, of course, but those people should never have been allowed to leave the UK.
Did any of the senior officers in the Met ever explain? I can only imagine the anger and the disbelief there would have been amongst the troops on the ground, the cops there. Was there no explanation given by the bosses in the Met?
No, nothing at all. Nothing at all. Let's say maybe they wanted to tell us, but I think they were stopped by other sources.
I think the fact that, Tom, you thought you were Deputy Chief Constable of Lothian and Borders, and you still thought until tonight that these guys, so at least a percentage of these people had diplomatic immunity. I think that was probably the common assumption, because it's an embassy, because that's the normal, and all the embassies in the Met and all the ones you had in Edinburgh, the assumption is that people in there and their spouses and their families have got this diplomatic immunity. And I think that's probably the smokescreen that was hidden behind, John, if that makes sense.
That's right. As I say, that was one of the main excuses given at the time by Liam Britton, who was the Home Secretary. Now, he was in charge, and Margaret Thatcher was, I think, was in Portugal on a common market thing or something. And if you look at the old press interviews that Liam Britton gave, he said there's not a lot we can do because they are entitled to diplomatic immunity. And of course they weren't.
John, we have covered and we will cover lots of campaigns. With a colleague of ours, George Barnsley, on here, who is still campaigning for recognition for 2 officers that were killed in Strathclyde Police almost as long ago as we're talking about here. We get people like that all the time. You, 40 years ago, told Yvonne that you would find out what had happened and get to the bottom of it. How do you start that process? What did you do back then to start that you became embroiled in this campaign over a 40-year period? As Tom says, it's defined your professional life thereafter. How do you kick that off? Because there's lots of other people out there. It's funny we're talking today when the government has just announced a pardon for all the post office workers who were prosecuted, all of them, who were prosecuted wrongly because of the Horizon computer. That campaign's been going for 20 years as well, maybe longer. And it's only today that the government's come out and made a real statement by doing what's never been done before and treading all over the courts. So how do you start that, John? What would you say to someone that feels that kind of injustice? Where did you start?
The reason I kicked it off was after the murder of Yvonne, there was very little information coming out from anybody. Now, I would have thought that rather quickly I would have been interviewed and asked to do a proper statement and all sorts of things like that. That never happened. Now, that brings up flags to me that there's something wrong. Nobody's telling me anything. I would try and get in touch. Now, I'm a PC. I'm not involved in the investigation, but I would ring up the murder squad or whoever's dealing with it and try to find something out. But nobody would tell me anything. That's a danger flag to me. I got the impression that nothing was being done for some reason, and I didn't know why. It wasn't until I left the police a few years later, really, because I had another injury on duty, so something completely different. It wasn't until I left then that I managed to progress things further. Now, I was writing reports and requests to speak to the commissioner at the time. I never got a reply. Nobody would speak to me. I thought, come on, what's going on? And it was only one of my last requests to see the commissioner that it actually went around the houses within Scotland Yard. And it was picked up by someone you probably know, John Grieve, who was the commander of the anti-terrorist branch at the time. Now Professor John Grieve.
Professor John Grieve, yes.
That's right. And I got an appointment with him, and I was over the moon until I walked into his office and saw him. And I didn't realise how big and brutal he was, but he was a lovely guy.
Yeah.
And I walked into his office in Scotland Yard. Now, by that time I'd retired. I was on the civil side, so I'm a pure little civvy in the Met Police, and I'm here with the top man in the UK with the anti-terrorist branch, and I'm shaking like a leaf. And I walked into his office, and he sat me down. He said, "John, nice to see you." He said, "No, this got me." He said, "We can't really talk in my office." He said, "Because walls have ears." I always remember. And I thought, goodness me, what's going on here? See? Anyway, we went away and had a coffee near Scotland Yard. And I'll be honest, he couldn't tell me much, and I accept that, but he pointed me in the right direction. But his parting words to me, this is what kicked me off. His parting words to me was, he said, "John," he said, "beware the men in suits."
Good advice. Very good advice.
He didn't say anything else, and that was good enough for me.
So where did you go from there? What were you looking for at this point, John? What was it, the questions you were asking? What would have satisfied you at that point if somebody had turned around and said, "We made decisions at the time based on the circumstances politically and globally that had to be made. And unfortunately, Yvonne was collateral damage. The bigger picture had to be considered, John. We need to leave it at that. Away you go." Would that have satisfied you at the time?
In some respects it would, because I would have had an answer at last to actually why and what had happened. I would have understood that some sort of investigation had gone on and things had been done. But the way things were with me, as far as I was concerned, nothing was being done at all. And I couldn't accept, and I will never accept that. And that is wrong.
Okay. What were you doing at this point? Were you another career? Were you working?
I was still employed by the Met, but on the civilian side, I was sitting in an office, which I hated, I hasten to add, but never mind.
Fair enough. Especially a community policeman that you'd been.
God, it was awful. Yeah.
Okay, John, take us through the process then of discovery. Was data protection a thing then? When did data protection come in? Roundabout then, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was round about then. But you see, when I left the Met, although I'm still obviously subject to the Official Secret Act, but I could do a lot more because I didn't have the restrictions, if you like, as being a PC behind me. So I started doing a bit of digging with various bits and pieces, and I discovered, a couple of other groups who had the same type of thing. I'm speaking about the Semtex in Northern Ireland. There was a woman on the internet, Felicity Prasak. Now, her husband was on a plane, a civilian plane, which was shot down by Gaddafi in retaliation for Lockerbie. Not a lot of people knew about her one, but they were doing the same type of thing. And that particular time, the Northern Ireland Select Committee were discussing the Libyan Semtex issues. And I went to every session of that and found out a few things from that as well. But I was also doing my own inquiries as well, because I was speaking to people. And then a few years went past, and I would call it the golden ticket, because the BBC got in contact with me. And they said they were interested in taking me to Libya. Would I do that? And of course, I jumped at that chance. That was great. The only thing was to go to Libya with Alan Little, BBC reporter.
Yeah.
I had to do a course with the BBC, and it was called the Hostile Environment course, which all war correspondents have got to do. Now, it's a residential course.
I knew some guys who designed that course and ran that.
Right. I did that. I was more frightened about doing that course than going to blooming Libya, I'll be perfectly honest. It was actually very good.
Nowadays, John, we just take you down the Royal Mile on a Saturday night, and that's you trained for a hostile environment.
So we did that. And off we went to Libya, and that was amazing. That was the start of my journey, really.
What was the BBC's angle there? Did they want to interview people out there? Did they want you on hand to keep the questioning on track?
Yeah, they'd found out that at that particular time, I was after a guy called Matuk. He was part of the Libyan entourage in that embassy, in that building as well. And I'd found out he was in Tripoli somewhere. So the idea was to go with the BBC to track this chap down.
Where did you get that name, John? Where did you get the names of the guys that were in there?
I'd spoken to people here. I'd been in touch with some of the Libyan students who'd been shot and injured, and they gave me names as well. Now, they'd identified a few people to me and given me names and could tell me where they were. For obvious reasons, they don't want to be involved in this, because it could put their lives at risk and the lives of their families at risk, so they didn't want to do it. So I was getting a lot of information from them. I was also getting a lot of information from the internet as well, but I'd made a lot of contacts, I had a lot of information, and I put things out to all colleagues, some who were there, who passed a lot of information on to me as well.
Like Matt Johnson, for example, who was driving the police car, and who's about it now. I need to ask you this, John. It might sound melodramatic to our Crime Time Inc. listeners, because these subjects are, sometimes we're a bit light-hearted here for obvious reasons. But I have to ask you, did you ever feel that your life was threatened, or was it ever threatened?
I can't prove it. I believe there's been 2 attempts to silence me over the years.
And can I ask you, is that friendly fire?
I would actually say it is friendly fire, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to go into that any further, or is that enough said about that just now?
I'll give you one little example, which is not well known because I haven't really spoken about it. But I was on a motorway and I'd been to Reading in Berkshire. The guy that I ended up taking to the High Court, he lived in Reading in Berkshire. I found out his address and I went to his address.
Is this a Libyan?
This is a Libyan, yeah.
Okay.
I found out he was in Reading in Berkshire and I went to his address.
On your own?
On my own. I was very tempted to knock on his door, I'll be perfectly honest, but I didn't do that. And I was on my way back and I was on the motorway. And it was about 1:30 in the afternoon. It was raining quite heavily. And I was in lane 2 of lane 4. I looked at my rearview mirror and I saw this black car coming up very fast in lane 1. And he drew level with me and bashed into me. I went into lane 3, into lane 4. I hit the central reservation, ended up on my roof. Nobody hit me, fortunately. But to cut a very long story short, the police and the ambulance and fire brigade, they were all there. 2 or 3 weeks had passed and I hadn't heard anything about this accident. And the police had no record of it. The ambulance service had no record of me being in the ambulance. There was no record of me being in the hospital. It was all rather strange.
I'll let Mr. Wood have a view here, because I could go on all night about this, because I've had lots of incidents like that over the years that I've seen, John. I've got strong views on it, but I'm not sure they're appropriate for here. Tom, what's your observations of that?
It's fascinating. I'm learning so much tonight. Can I just wind it back a bit? Obviously, a political decision was taken based on some kind of political necessity that they should walk free. But before that, there must have been a major incident investigation. There must have been a murder squad investigation. Do you know who headed investigations up? You said you were never interviewed. Literally, do you mean that? A statement was never taken from you? Really?
No, a statement was taken from me at the hospital, a duty statement about obviously what had happened that day. I gave that statement, a few hours after Yvonne had passed away. The other thing you've got to remember is that after she'd passed away, a detective chief superintendent came in and saw me in that room I was in the hospital, and he said I had to go with Yvonne's body to the mortuary, which I did. And for some reason, they made me stay and watch that post-mortem. I don't know why. I know it wouldn't happen now.
From an investigative point of view, I find that absolutely bizarre. You were a primary witness in the first instance, and escorting the body and the post-mortem should have been done by other people altogether. It's difficult now because you sometimes forget all the things you didn't do and didn't know. Systems were entirely different, but even then, that's very odd.
I can understand me going with the body to the mortuary. I can understand that because they've got the continuity evidence. I can accept that. Yeah. But I could never forget and never will forgive them for making me stay there when that happened.
No, I don't blame you. I find that extremely bizarre. Okay, so there's a detective chief superintendent, there's a murder investigation, and you think about 24 hours. The place is obviously locked down. There's firearms officers around it, and nothing's moving. Do you know if there's a negotiation started, or do you know if there's negotiators? Because the Met had first-class negotiators.
You've got to remember, I never went back there. But the negotiation has started, and they had some very good people there. But I do think the Met had their hands tied. And the reason I say that is because there was political interference. I know that MI5, MI6 were involved in those negotiations as well. Now, I don't know who holds the upper hand with those. Is it the negotiation team or is it the government departments? I've got no idea. This is, I think, why it's rather unique, because I've never known that before.
Who was the commissioner at that time?
Kenneth Newman.
Right, Kenneth Newman, okay. He had a reputation of being a very principled man.
Yeah.
As you say, it's stranger and stranger. So then taking it on then, you obviously start to gather a wealth of information, included in which are the names of the people who you believe fired the shots. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And then after a period of time, you get invited by Alan Little on the BBC, and I actually know Alan Little, and there's nobody better. He's an absolutely superb reporter.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. He lives in Edinburgh. He lives not very far from me, actually. So you go over there with him, and I'm fascinated. What happens then?
I was after, at that particular time, a guy called Matuk and a guy called Baghdadi, and we had a rough idea where they were in Tripoli. And we booked into a hotel over there, that sort of press hotel. BBC people had made various telephone calls and arranged various bits and pieces for meetings. So the next morning, we were to go and meet the local militia commander, who would point us in the direction of where Matuk was. So off we went the next morning, through a couple of checkpoints, and we drove into a part of Tripoli, and we drove up a hill. And I looked behind us, because we were in a Jeep with Alan, a producer, a cameraman, and with two bodyguards and a driver. I looked behind us, and I don't know what you call them. It's like a half truck with a machine gun on top, like the Toyota half trucks with a gunner on top.
Pickup truck thing, yes, that's right. Yeah.
That's right. So that drove at the bottom of the road, so we were cut off. We're halfway up the hill, the same thing happens at the top. So we can't go backwards and we can't go forwards. So I thought, oh, goodness me, what's going on here? And then from a side road, our man comes down, doesn't he, in a Jeep, the local commander. He got out. He could speak perfect English. He was very good. And Alan Little spoke to him, and it went very well. He said, yes. He said, I know all about the story of Yvonne Fletcher. We're very sorry. I will do as much as I can to help you. And we asked if he knew where Matuk lived. And he said, oh, yes. He said, he's not far from here. He said, I will get one of my soldiers to come with you and you can go to the address. And I thought, brilliant, this is great. We're on our way. So off we went with the soldier with us. And we went to this address on the outskirts of Tripoli. Now, it was still in Gaddafi territory. This was part of the problem because there was a lot of supporters of Gaddafi still there in that particular area. But anyway, we went there. And it was like a big palace with a big wall around it, this address, completely on its own. And big metal gates with a big chain around it with a padlock, so we couldn't get in. But apparently there was a soldier inside the grounds. The guy we were with, the soldier we were with, had tried to contact him, but we couldn't get anything. Of course, the next thing I knew is this soldier got his AK-47 out and he shot the lock off. So we walked into the gates. Now, we went up a drive, and I always remember on the right-hand side, Matuk had a private zoo, and there was all these dead animals lying in the cages. All sorts of animals. I always remember that. And we walked into this house, and the house was massive. Everything was green and gold, and it looked as though the place had been ransacked. And we had a good look round. Do you know not that I've ever done this, and you probably haven't done it either, but if you go to some of the big jewelers and you buy your wife or your partner a gold necklace and a watch and a bracelet, it comes in one of those leather cases. Do you know what I mean? Those big leather cases. There were 4 very large safes there, and they were all open. And there must have been 200 of these empty cases lying on the floor. It shows you the wealth that this guy had. But he'd gone. We'd missed him by about 2 to 3 days. He'd obviously been warned that we were coming. And the rebels, as they were called then, had obviously gone in and ripped the place apart.
This is after the fall of Gaddafi. So
this is just after the fall of Gaddafi, yeah.
The whole of Libya is in turmoil, and various militias have taken over control of various local areas. And so you're negotiating with one of these armed militia groups to get access.
Yeah.
The second question is, this fellow Matuk, the people in the embassy were students, but this guy's obviously not a student. Did you ever find out, was he an intelligence officer masquerading as a student, or what was he? What kind of person was he?
You're quite right. You're quite right. He was, yes. Yeah, he was an intelligence agent and he was masquerading as a student. He had a student visa. That's why I was after him. We had other couple of meetings arranged, and we had a meeting with the vice president of the National Transitional Council, as it was then. And we were due to fly from Tripoli to Benghazi, where he was based. We went to Tripoli airport, and then we'd been told that a suspect device had been found on the plane, so we couldn't fly, and it was too far to us to drive, so we couldn't do that. So we ended up doing a telephone conference call with the vice president, who filled me in with some very good information regarding discussions that the Libyans had been having with the UK government here. Now, Tony Blair was the Prime Minister at the time, and he'd been in discussions with them. So I found out a few things about that. I won't go into what they said or what he said, because I'd probably get rather annoyed. It wasn't good news as far as I was concerned. Then I came back from Libya on my own. I went to Tripoli airport, and I actually flew back on a United Nations plane, which was good because I sat next to a colonel, I think he was from the Netherlands, who knew something about the Libyan situation, and he told me a few things as well. So, I was keeping all this stuff in, and I used it at a later date. So it worked out quite well. But it was a very good trip and very enlightening for me, because never once did I think I would be in Libya. It was thanks to the BBC I was there.
The funny thing is, you probably got further than they would have through diplomatic channels, because the police couldn't have done what you did.
That's right. It's like all the other trips I made to Libya afterwards. I had a golden key. My key opened a lot of doors. And that key was the US dollar, because I could use those keys. Diplomats, officials, they can't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the key. It opens doors. That's the way the world is over there. And it worked very well.
So, John, tell us now then, where are you now with it then? Where are you? Is Matuk still alive? Where is he? Who's the other person? I think there were 2 involved in it.
The guy who was after us in Matuk, he was shot some time ago. A guy called Salih Mabruk. Now, Salih Mabruk was the second in command of the Libyan Secret Service. He was in the People's Bureau at the time. He gave the orders. The orders came from Tripoli to him, and he passed them on to the gunmen. I found out, now this is a guy that had been to see the address in Reading. I didn't know he was in Reading because he'd been deported. Now, how can a person who's been deported, he was deported for person non grata involved in domestic and international terrorism, deported from the UK. How can that same person be allowed back into the UK, given a UK passport, and settles in Berkshire? It defies everything I know about immigration law.
At risk of slighting this guy's character, he's obviously an informant.
He may well have been, yeah.
He must have been an intelligence asset.
I'll come to that later on. Anyways, I obviously found out he's there. So in 2015, I get a phone call one evening from the Sun newspaper. The Sun says to me, look, we've had a press release from Scotland Yard. There's going to be a big announcement tomorrow. We don't know what it's about, but we think it's about Yvonne Fletcher. Have you heard anything? And I said, no, nobody tells me anything, mate. I don't know anything. The next morning, the press conference took place, and it said that Sally Mabruk, his wife and son, had been arrested. Sally Mabruk had been arrested for conspiracy to murder Yvonne Fletcher and money laundering. His wife and son had been arrested for money laundering. At a very early stage, the money laundering was dropped, but Sally Mabruk remained on police bail for about 18 months for conspiracy to murder. So the investigation continued with him. The report went to the Crown Prosecution Service, and the Met had sufficient evidence, as far as they were concerned, for this person to be charged. And the CPS said that they required 2 further pieces of evidence, and unless they got that evidence, he wouldn't be charged. So that evidence was evidence from the Home Office and evidence from the Foreign Office. The Home Office and the Foreign Office refused to hand over that evidence on the grounds of national security. So without that evidence, Mabruk wasn't charged and he was released. Now that was a kick in the teeth. That was an insult. That was disgusting. That should never have happened. I had all this information. I had all this evidence. I knew about it. Very few other people didn't. So I thought, I've got to get this evidence out there. I've got all this stuff. What am I going to do? So it was then that I was diagnosed with PTSD. I didn't know what that was. I was still getting nightmares and cold sweats and all sorts of things. I still get them now, although it's not quite so bad now. But I decided that I would sue this guy. Now, this is something I shouldn't have to do. I shouldn't be doing this. It's the prosecuting authorities should be taking this guy to court, not me. But I made a few inquiries with the lawyers. Now, as I said before, I'd been to the Northern Ireland Select Committee when they were discussing the Centex situation supplied by Gaddafi in the Northern Ireland. So I knew a firm of solicitors who were dealing with that and had been aware of all the Libyan situation. So I got in contact with them and they said they would take the case on. The problem was it would cost a fair bit of money, like every other litigation. So I had a bit of money saved up, so I gave it to them. And I started doing some fundraising, which went very well. And now I put everything I had into it. I always remember back then, I'd saved up about £8,500. I was going to buy a car, believe it or not, so I could get to work. And I was just about to buy this car when I got a letter from the solicitors to saying it was my first bill. It was £9,000. So the car went out the window, of course. And I carried on. But we did the fundraising and we got enough money. And we sued Sally Mabruk in the High Court. So we had 3 days in the High Court. And
is that what we would call a private prosecution up here, Tom?
Oh, it was a civil action.
It's civil action, yeah. It's a civil action.
Yeah.
I sued him, really for personal injury. I sued him for the princely sum of £1 because it wasn't about money. It wasn't about compensation. It was about justice, and it was about getting my evidence heard by someone independent for them to decide whether this guy was guilty or not. Mm-hmm. So we had 3 days in the High Court. I was represented by Philip Kaufman QC, and it was pretty tough. It was pretty tough because obviously I had to give evidence and a few other people had as well, but it went very well. And it came to Judgment Day. You don't know how things go. You've got no idea. You think you've done very well, like we used to do when we were policemen. Judgment Day, 10 o'clock in the morning, in the High Court in London, senior High Court judge. And just before he came out, the judge's clerk came out, and she came over to me. I was sitting in the front row, and she said, "Mr. Murray, with the judge's compliments, this is a copy of his judgment." Of course, the first thing you do is you look at the back page, don't you? God almighty, I'd won. We'd won. But I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't shout out because everybody didn't know, did they? So the judge came, and 2 hours later, he finished his summing up. And that was it. The court was packed, and it was on a video stream as well. Everybody in that courtroom stood up and applauded. And the solicitors, the lawyers, the press, everybody stood up and applauded. The judge said to my counsel, "I have never had this in my court before." My counsel said to the judge, "My lord, you will never have it again." And it was an historic victory. It was a victory that few people thought we couldn't do, but we did it. And we proved, okay, it's in the civil court, and I accept that Sally Mabruk was partly responsible for the murder of Yvonne. I've never said he's pulled the trigger. I've never said he killed her. I've never said that at all. But one thing stuck in my mind, and it was a few words in that judgment by the judge. Now, this is a senior High Court judge. And he said, "If this matter came before me in a criminal court, I would convict." Now, that says it all. So we don't need the other evidence. So why, to this day, does the Crown Prosecution Service still not charge Mabruk with conspiracy to murder?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I was going to say that obviously you were operating to the balance of probability in a civil case, which is different from beyond all reasonable doubt. Very telling comments from the judge just about the standard of proof as he saw it. Very interesting.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a
completely.
question, John? I do a lot of work with an organisation called LEAP, and we are campaigning to have our drug laws changed and amended. And when I speak to the police, when I speak to Police Scotland and old colleagues and new friends, etc., that I've met over the last few years, I get a very positive feedback from them. They're very much on our side, if you like. They want to see these laws changed. They want to see a different approach. They want to have a different way of policing the drugs world, if you like. But publicly, it's a different story altogether. They have to toe the party line. They have to say the right things for the press, etc., etc. Did you have that with the Met? Did the Met want to pursue this, but their hands were tied from above?
I've got no doubt about that at all. I've got no doubt at all that the Met wanted this guy charged. And they were very disappointed that didn't happen. They did do a lot of work. And there is no doubt they wanted him charged. Obviously.
You know what's striking for me is, and for everybody in the country, I think, is the power of the media and drama that we've just seen. Because the government have been brought to their knees within a week of a dramatised programme about the post office.
Absolutely.
After 20 odd years of procrastination and passing the buck from left, right, and centre, and denial and lies, cover-ups, and all the rest of it, they've been brought to their knees by a STV drama programme.
That's right.
It was only an hour long.
That's right.
Have you ever thought that you could do something along those lines, John? Because it's got all the elements, hasn't it? It's got all the elements to make a drama from. There's security services.
Well, I think that is in the pipeline. I think there's a few companies interested in doing that. I don't know if they're actually going to go ahead, but it is in the pipeline, and it is what we need. It is a good story. Obviously, the book is done very well. It's got it out there. There's a lot of stuff in the book which is not common knowledge. But as I say, it's something that we shouldn't have had to do. We're not finished yet. I'm not finished yet. We're going to carry on.
So what is the next steps then? When was that? When was that civil conviction, if you like? When was that civil judgment made?
That was 21, yeah. Yeah, November 21. After that case, I wrote to the CPS asking them to reconsider their original decision not to charge Mabruk with criminal matters. They basically said what you said to them about the standard of evidence, and that was it. Nothing else. And they wouldn't reconsider unless there was new evidence coming from the Met Police. which obviously hasn't happened. So my next step is, in this 40th year, is to do a private criminal prosecution against Saleh Mabruk for conspiracy to murder Yvonne Fletcher. This is something that I will kick off in the next few weeks, and I want to see him convicted in a criminal court. It doesn't have to be in the UK. I'm quite willing to go back to Libya, but I think the best place for a trial to take place would be the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Completely independent. That is a place that these things should go to and be tried properly.
There's obviously a lot of money involved there as well, John. Have you got an appeal going? Is there anything that we can help you with here?
We will be starting an appeal for that. The 3 days in the High Court, for example, say, our costs were just over £400,000 for 3 days. Now, we managed to obviously raise that money.
Have you got that car yet? Did you ever get the car?
No, I didn't get the car. No. But obviously, Mabruk had, because he lost, he's got to obviously do the costs.
Yes.
Now, he's back in Libya.
Yes.
So I'm trying to pursue him for that, which is proven difficult and costly just to do that. The private criminal prosecution will be costly, but I'm pretty sure we can raise the money to do that. There is a caveat with any private criminal prosecution, isn't there? And that's because at any stage, the Crime Prosecution Service can step in and take it over. What they can do, which I think they've done in the past, is offer no evidence. Once they've done that, that's the end of it. There's nothing else you can do. There is a possibility they may well do that in our particular case. However, if they do, I think we would still be on a win-win, because that would probably prove everything that we've done and everything that we've said. So I don't think they will take that risk. I think it will go for trial. Mabruk doesn't have to be there. He can be tried in his absence. He can take part in video link. He refused that at the High Court. He'll probably refuse it again. But we will move forward with this. We will take him to a criminal court.
You say we, John. I take it you've got colleagues, former colleagues. You've got some associates now who are on this path with you. I saw
yes.
When you came out of the High Court, when you got the verdict, when you came out of the High Court, you were surrounded by smiling faces and banners and lovely pictures of Yvonne in uniform and whatnot. I take it there's a big we now.
Yes, yeah. I've got a good few guys behind me now helping me out. For a long time, I did this on my own. I got to the stage where I couldn't do it anymore. It was just too much. And I reached out, and a lot of people stepped in to help me. And they still do. And I know we've got a lot of support out there. That support's increasing. We've got a lot of support now in Parliament, which we never ever used to have. Questions are being asked. I was in Parliament yesterday. Things are moving on. And you're quite right. It is like this post office thing. I've always said that these things take time. I didn't think it would take 40 years, but I can wait another couple of years before we're finished. But we'll definitely get there, and we'll definitely get a conviction. We're going to prove those people wrong.
I take it when Gaddafi died, things changed.
When he died, a lot of people came forward and contacted me because under his regime, they were just too frightened. They really were. Some of those guys had never, ever spoken to anybody about what happened to them. Not even their wives, not even their families. All sorts of things like that. But now he's gone. A lot of people came forward, and there's a lot more information, a lot of new evidence has come in.
I take it the other side of that coin, our servicemen, our Secret Service, our Special Branch, all these guys it was all covered up back in the day for the bigger picture, we're assuming. Have any of them approached you since confidentially and to tell you what's going on behind the scenes?
No, nobody like that at all. I mean, I've been raided twice at home over the years, don't you?
No, I didn't know that, John.
I've been raided twice at home with MI6 research warrants. Yeah. I don't know who was more embarrassed, those guys or me, to be perfectly honest, but never mind.
It's interesting it was MI6. That's in itself. That's very revealing in itself, Tom.
What was on the warrant? What were they looking for?
I had documents and articles concerned with domestic and international terrorism. Of course I did. Of course it is.
In other words, they were worried that you knew something they didn't.
That's it. I think it was just, as I say, I don't know who was more embarrassed. So those guys are, and then they were very good. I had a bit of laugh with them, but that's to be honest. They were only doing what they were told. And I think it was done just to frighten me, if you know what I mean. But it obviously didn't work.
It's a very odd contrast because so much of the case that you've outlined is very similar to the Lockerbie case. You've got the same principal actors, you're dealing with the same time period, you've got intelligence agents pretending to be other people acting on behalf of Gaddafi. You've got the deal in the desert as the sort of background to a lot of it. And yet, in the Lockerbie case, there was never a suggestion that there would be some diplomatic fudge. It was all out to try and brush aside the obstacles from the American side and from the British side and from the international side as well. It's a strange contrast between the official approach to both these outrageous crimes. Okay, there was hundreds of people killed at Lockerbie, but in terms of the criminal act, the heinous manner of the criminal act, they were exactly the same. Terrible.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
John, did you ever get any response from any of the players from the Libyan side? Did you ever get any feedback from there at all? Or ever had any apology or anything like that at all? Did Gaddafi not apologise?
No, what he did was, Yvonne was murdered in 84. Now, in 85, 86, Queenie, Mum and Tim, Dad, were invited to Tripoli to meet Gaddafi. Now, they didn't want to go. Queenie spoke to me before she went, and she said, John, she said, I didn't want to go. But she was actually forced by the Foreign Office to go. So they went over there to meet him in Tripoli, and they were given £250,000 in compensation for the murder of Yvonne. Again, money which she didn't want to accept. But again, from the Foreign Office, you have to take this money because if you don't, it's an insult to the Libyans and the Libyan people and Colonel Gaddafi. So she took the money, and after that, she gave most of it away. I don't think she could ever forget that because, as I say, she didn't want to do it. She called it blood money, but she was forced to do it just to appease our government, if you like.
Did you ever find out, John, why they opened fire that day? I mean, obviously there was a crowd of dissidents there, if you like, anti-Gaddafi and whatnot. Was there a target? Was there a specific target? Was there something that triggered taking that drastic step of opening up an automatic weapon on the crowd?
They were actually after one guy who was in the crowd. And the idea was going to be that during the demonstrations, the pro-Gaddafi guys would run out of the front door of the bureau, run across the road, grab this guy, take him back in. Now, they couldn't do that now because the car barriers had been put up both sides. They couldn't get through to him. So that was a plan. That was the particular target, was somebody in the crowd.
And they wanted him so badly that they just opened fire randomly.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Did they shoot him? Did he get injured?
No, he didn't. No, he didn't.
John, I don't know about Tom, but I'm drained listening to this because it's so intriguing and it's so sad and it's got everything that you would. Hopefully there is a drama made about it, a behind-the-scenes drama, because there'll be so much. You've only skimmed the surface. I can sense this just now.
Yeah.
The evidence that you've got. If the judge made a judgment, a written judgment, it took him 2 hours to read it, then I can imagine the depth that it had to go into and the nuances of this and lots of stuff that perhaps our authorities wouldn't want us to know. Is there a limitation on this stuff, or is this always going to be secret, do you think?
Back in 85, Margaret Thatcher set up an inquiry into the failings of the government and the intelligence services in relation to the murder of Yvonne Fletcher. And that inquiry was headed by Sir Anthony Duff, who was the Cabinet Secretary at the time. He did a report, and it was rather damning, to say the least, against the government and against security services for a number of reasons. Some people in Parliament have seen that report. 2 people who spring to mind, and I spoke to them many years ago. You may remember them. One was a guy called Teddy Taylor, the MP for Southend, and Tam Dalyell. From opposite sides of the spectrum, I hasten to add. But I spoke to them, or they spoke to me many years ago. They've both passed away now, unfortunately. But they said, John, you really need to see that report. They said, that proves what you've said all along. So, under the 30-year rule, first thing I did was apply for a copy. Surprise, surprise. It's been held for another 30 years. Now, if that doesn't say that they're worried about something in that report, then there's something wrong, I'm afraid.
I think we get the idea, John, don't we? We know what's going on here. And that's a bit like the post office.
Yes, that's right.
Everybody knew what was going on, but nobody had the balls to stand up and say, let's get this sorted. Because it could have been sorted long ago with a wee bit of something that we talk about here, or quite a bit, with a wee bit of something that politicians don't seem to grasp.
a wee bit of honesty, just a
Honesty.
wee bit,
Yeah.
to the right people, to sit you down and tell you what they could tell you, because you understand that there's things that are beyond our need to know, if you like. But just a wee bit of compassion, a wee bit of understanding, and a wee bit of truth thrown in there somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
And this might have all gone away for you 30 years ago or 35 years ago.
Yeah, that's it.
But then you would never have got on our podcast.
No, that's true.
Terrible.
That's true. The other thing is, see, I've been lucky. I've got to places and met people that would never normally speak. And I had a bit of luck at the last general election. I got a message from one of my colleagues to say there's a new MP in Parliament. He's an ex-detective inspector in the Met, and he might be able to do something for you. His name's Alan Dorrans, and he's SNP. I got in touch with Mr. Dorrans, and I sent him a quick email, and I said, Dear Mr. Dorrans, are you the same Alan Dorrans that I joined the police cadets with in 1972? We were billeted together, we did X, Y, and Z together, and of course it was.
Yeah.
Now, Alan has been my stalwart in Parliament. The amount of work he's done, he's had 2 meetings with 2 prime ministers. He's been absolutely fantastic. And it's just a stroke of luck. And it's, it couldn't have been any better.
I don't like that stroke of luck talk at all, because as we all know, and certainly Tom and I know as former detectives, you make your own luck. It's perseverance, it's knocking on doors, it's talking to people, it's taking all the negatives that you get, and you know you're going to find the positive, but you just got to go through the numbers until you get there. It's not luck at all, John. It's actually your dedication to this, and I can only take my hat off to you. If I had one anymore, of course, what you've done over the last 40 years. And I love you saying we're not finished yet. And anything we can do here at Crime Time Inc., links to websites or anything at all, have you got a petition or anything like that, or anything at all that you let us know about, John? We'll support you. I'm sure Tom will back me up here.
Yeah, I'll have a look at that. Yeah, get you something.
Yeah. You know something, John? I always think it's very sad if people live their lives without a purpose. I think there's nothing sadder than purposelessness, if that's a word. Well, nobody could say that about you, John. You're a fine example of someone who has absolutely living your life with a purpose. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you about it. And as I say, I've learned a lot. I thought I knew about this case, but I've learned a lot tonight.
John, there's no question, and I'm sure all our listeners at Crime Time Inc. will agree that you've more than surpassed the promise that you made in that ambulance to your colleague Yvonne on the day that she was murdered. And we wish you every success moving forward. We all take our hat off to you and what you've been doing.
I'm nobody special. I'm the same as you, the same as everybody. If you'd been there, I know you'd probably be doing the same thing that I'm doing. That's the way we were back then. We looked after each other, and that's probably what's missing these days. If I'd changed places with Yvonne once more, you wouldn't be talking to me. You'd probably be talking to Yvonne, and she'd be doing exactly the same. So I'm lucky. She was a good friend. I will never forget her, and I will make sure other people don't forget her. But I will not rest at all until Matuk is found guilty in a criminal court, and I will get him there, and I will do it.
John, here at Crime Time Inc., we like to think that we support campaigns like yours, and we've done so with other colleagues. If there's anything we can do through our social media here at Crime Time Inc. or Crime Time Inc. Extra, please let us know. We'll be with you all the way as we commemorate the 40th anniversary of this horrific murder, and we'll do everything we can to support you in your cause.
Tom?
Pleasure speaking to you, John, and as I say, fascinating insight. And I just hope that the people who listen to this episode of Crime Time Inc. find it half as interesting as I have.
Thank you, Tom.
Good night, John.
Next time on Crime Time Inc.
In the meantime, we had scored every kind of drug known to man, okay? You could have got anything in there at all, including smack, cocaine, anything at all. And on the Friday night, the place was getting hit. All the uniform boys and all CID came in and raided the joint. And the biggest accolade from my very young undercover career at that point was that when they were all lined up, handcuffed, getting searched, drugs were all on our pool table. All the drugs were laid out on our pool table. in front of the culprit that they'd been found on. And one of them realised who we were. And he said to the uniform inspector that was on duty, he said, "I don't believe those two are cops. Who are they really? They're madmen. They can't be cops." So our cover was perfect. The guy wouldn't believe that we were police officers.